I had no idea the British press was so bigoted.
This one's wife. Meghan raged at audience. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. This one's wife is a mid-range type A narcissist. This means that many of her behaviours are covert in nature. While she thinks very highly of herself, she tends more to adopt false humility rather than being boastful and bragging in the way, for instance, that Donald Trump talks about himself. She attempts, although invariably fails, to be self-deprecating. Be under no illusion, she thinks that she is brilliant. After all, we have seen the way that she thinks that she is fantastic at writing books, giving speeches, being an ambassador, undertaking philanthropic work, being humane, wearing clothing, being a fashion icon, engaging in the creation of content, cooking, crafts, and so forth. She thinks that whatever she turns her hand to, she does brilliantly, although the evidence demonstrates to the contrary. As a mid-range type A narcissist, she relies heavily on the appearance of a facade. This facade takes various forms, but essentially is all about appearing like a kind, empathic, compassionate individual. This is hugely important to those narcissists that operate with that type of facade, because first of all, the utilization of that facade allows her to control people, because they think, oh, she's lovely, she's kind, she's warm, she's wonderful, and their reaction demonstrates they're under control. They are, in effect, controlled by the presence of the facade. Their response, admiration, approval, sympathy, provides her with fuel. It may also translate into some form of residual benefit also. Thus, the presentation of this facade is hugely important. Furthermore, it is useful because what it does is it provides a public contrast with what she does privately. As I have explained in separate videos, because her being this type of narcissist, you are highly unlikely to see her getting into a fist fight with somebody. You're highly unlikely to see her engaged in a raging shouting match on the balcony of Buckingham Palace with Prince Harry or another member of the royal family. You're not going to see her in a hair-pulling, eye-gouging bout of combat with the Princess of Wales on a green somewhere. Instead, what you get is behind-the-scenes behaviours. Cold shoulders, icing people out, glaring at them, shouting at them, bullying them, all away from the public glare. This is typical behaviour of the mid-range type A narcissist. And what it also means is that when somebody questions the behaviour by trying to go public with it, they invariably find themselves in difficulties because everybody else looks at the facade and says, well, I've never had a problem with this person. Are you sure that they shouted at you? Perhaps you might have been a little bit too sensitive to what they were saying. Are we talking about the same person? They always are so lovely with me. And it creates a problem for that victim, who is usually the intimate partner primary source and can be a friend or a family member, but usually the IPPS, because the presentation of the facade convinces so many other people that the individual is a good and kind person, so that when somebody lifts the lid on what goes on behind closed doors, they find themselves less likely to be believed. Throw in the fact that the narcissist often also presents as cool as a cucumber, it causes doubt to be poured on the story that is advanced by that victim. Accordingly, for a narcissist such as this one's wife, her facade is hugely important. Now, we have seen cracks in that facade. This has happened as a consequence of the fact that, first of all, she is scrutinised and exposed to a great degree, meaning there are always cameras pointed towards her, and secondly, she does face repeated threats to her control, and her facade management, whilst not awful, isn't the best, which means from time to time we have seen those cracks in the facade, or what you might describe as mask slips. An example of that was in respect of when her mother interrupted her at the Grenfell cookery incident, and she turned and glared at her. Incidences where she has given Catherine the death stare from a distance, where she is suddenly whipped around and given Harry a glare. We have seen repeated mask slips because she's so often caught on camera. What you don't see is a full-on rage attack, because she is able to manage that control, and also her facade demands that she can't lose her shit in public that way, because that would really be the death knell for her. Some narcissists regularly lose their shit and rant and rage because they don't operate a facade. Or some have a facade, but their control over it is so intermittent, lower mid-range narcissists, that you regularly see eruptions to it. But for someone like this one's wife, it is highly unlikely that you would ever see a public full-on rage attack. It would only occur in extremis. She would be more likely to remove herself because her narcissism, in order to maintain the facade, would be more likely to nullify the threat to control by causing her to basically sulk and walk off, to retreat by asserting control by withdrawal rather than going on the attack. And I've explained all of this to help you understand the nature of the way that this one's wife behaves in light of some information that has been sent to me in respect of what this one's wife has purportedly done. There is a video which has accumulated some 77,000 views, which talks about this one's wife essentially screaming at a crowd. So this isn't an instance of individual bullying behind closed doors. This isn't cold shouldering Harry behind closed doors or being nasty to Archie behind closed doors. This is an instance of a full-on rage attack in public, which, as I've mentioned, does not sit with her style of narcissism, and ultimately would only happen in extremis, where she wouldn't be able to walk away and she was pinned in one place, and her narcissism would have no choice but to go on the attack. And therefore, the likelihood of this happening vis-a-vis her as a narcissist is highly unlikely to begin with. But let's examine what this video actually tells us. There's a lot of chit-chat at the beginning about how things have gone wrong at Netflix. It doesn't really get into the detail of what she's purportedly meant to have done, and therefore there's a reasonable amount of filler. But apparently, that's the case that she screamed at a live audience on stage when she was taking questions about With Love Meghan Season 2. Multiple screeners brought up the fact that they found her social media campaign to be very poor to promote With Love Meghan Season 2 using her pregnancy video, and then handed out tips that what she did was not only unprofessional, but that it was embarrassing for many mothers and even fathers out there taking care of their newborn children. Now, what the video doesn't explain particularly clearly, but I will endeavour to do so, is that it appears to suggest that this one's wife took a Q&A session as part of the promotional work and feedback in respect of With Love Meghan, and that it was suggested that her twerking video was part of a social media campaign to gain people's interests for the purposes of promoting With Love Meghan. Now, that suggestion from the video doesn't make sense, because we'd already had the first half of Season 1 back in March, and the twerking video occurred last month. Accordingly, there's at least a 2-month, nearly 3-month gap between With Love Meghan Part 1 and the twerking video. Furthermore, With Love Meghan Part 2 of Season 1 isn't due out until September, and therefore the twerking video can't be said to promote it, which of course casts doubt on the veracity of the content of this particular video that claims that this is what had happened. And it would appear that when she was doing this Q&A session, according to this video, that when she was being given feedback, she was basically told that using the twerking video for the purpose of promoting With Love Meghan was unprofessional and was embarrassing for many mothers and even fathers out there taking care of their newborn children. Accordingly, According to this video, this one's wife was confronted about this during the last test screening, and as a consequence of this, she then erupted. Screeners pointed out how unprofessional it was to use this video. It turned out that this one's wife snapped at them and raised her voice and even screamed so loud into the microphone that it rattled through the entire audience, where she labelled them as haters and false fans and kept repeating and demanding that the audience stop heckling her live on stage in the middle of this Q&A. The video goes on to explain that this wasn't the third Q&A session, but rather a new shocking development connected to the last one, which was the second one that took place days and days ago that Netflix was fuming over. Apparently, it got so bad to the point that they had to actually get this one's wife off stage immediately. And Netflix producers had to actually come on stage to directly apologise that her social media posts were never part of their marketing campaign or strategy ever, and that it was all a misunderstanding. Apparently, this was the very moment when even Ted Sarandos, the Netflix CEO, decided to pull the plug on plans for future Q&A sessions with this one's wife, unless she actually shapes up and fine-tunes her behaviour with the public. Thus, this is what is stated, that there was a Q&A session that took place in respect of with Love Meghan, that as part of this, members of the public who were in the audience criticised her for the apparent utilisation of her twerking video in the Q&A session, and this one's wife reacted badly to that, shouting and screaming at them to the extent that she had to be led off stage. Now, as I pointed out, there is a chronological discrepancy with all of this, because presumably the Q&As would have taken place around the time of, if they did at all, and I'm not sure that there's ever been any Q&As that have taken place in relation to With Love Meghan, but let's just assume there have been. You would have thought that they've taken place either prior to the screening or just afterwards or whilst it was being streamed, namely the episodes that went out in March. And yet, the twerking video didn't appear until June. That chronological discrepancy creates a gap in veracity with regard to the content of this video. Furthermore, you should imagine that if this actually happened, it would have been reported in many other places, but it hasn't been, which again casts doubt on the veracity of the content of this video. Furthermore, if this one's wife was having a meltdown on stage, you can bet your bottom dollar that somebody would have whipped out their phone and recorded it. After all, virtually everybody possesses a smartphone which has the capacity to film and to photograph, and an incident whereby this one's wife was shouting and screaming into a microphone would likely lead to somebody having recorded it, in the similar way that the CEO of Astronomer got caught out with his affair. That happened to be filmed by somebody in the audience, and it went viral. Someone as notable as this one's wife, if she went on a public rampage, ranting and raving with a rage attack on stage with a microphone, surely it would have been recorded and we would have seen that footage in the open. But we haven't. Which causes me to conclude that this is yet another instance of absolute bullshit being propagated in relation to this one's wife. Who's the offender? Well, it's a content creator called Mike Zero, who you may have heard of. And I make mention of this because a number of people have put his videos before me on the basis that what he's talking about is true. Now, he has a reputation within the Star Wars community, and if you don't believe me, just go and Google his name with Star Wars and you can find out what they all have to say about his behaviour there. And latterly, he has taken to the bandwagon that is this one's wife. He's very much a Johnny-come-lately, and he's started to create videos of this nature, and there are others which have been shown to me, whereby, quite simply, what he says doesn't bear up to any critical thinking. There's no actual evidence provided as to what went on. There's no reportage elsewhere. In this instance, there seems to be a chronological discrepancy, and yet there are people that continue to fail to apply critical thinking to believe this. For instance, a quick dive into the comments. Netflix deserves all they get with this woman. She has no class. End of story. If that's how she treats an audience, imagine how she treats staff. Yup, that's right. Netflix, just get rid of the fake, she was never pregnant. What is wrong with the Netflix management? Definitely losing respect and subscribers. Netflix deserves to lose subscribers for continuing to support Markle. She's absolutely detestable. Ted, grow a bigger pair or resign. Put the trash out to the curb. She's a very sad, sad person. She only loves herself. They are absolute idiots to keep her. And on it goes. There isn't anybody who comments, did this really happen? This is actually making sense. And this is the problem, as I will continue to highlight. When you have individuals engaging in this behaviour where they create information which doesn't bear up to scrutiny, not only does this mislead a lot of people, but it means that it makes it easier for the likes of Harry and this one's wife to criticise those that legitimately point out problems in their behaviour. I know that many of my viewers are entirely sensible and adhere to the principles of going to the evidence and the application of critical thinking. Those are the people that I attract to my channel. That is what I seek to instill in you. And I know, for instance, that you recognise that there are so many things that this one's wife does that one can criticise and analyse and take apart. You don't need to make shit up about her. And yet there are certain content creators that persist in doing this. There are ones which are basically AI based. There are others where, and you know who the offenders are, they regularly engage in this sensationalism where it is idle speculation without saying it is as such, and the making up of information and the failure to present evidence. This is dangerous activity. There are those, for instance, like the Royal Grift. You may not necessarily agree with her conclusions. You may not necessarily agree with the political slant that she puts on things. And you may not agree with her interpretation of the evidence that she provides. But what she does do is she provides evidence. She goes and looks for evidence and links it together. She doesn't just come up with a spurious idea. There are other channels that spend their time joining the dots. For instance, Shauna of the Vintage Read, she will go into detail about what has happened, and she will articulate observations based upon evidence. There are other YouTubers that behave in a similar way, and I don't have time to go through each and every one of them, but you'll be well acquainted with who they are, and you'll also be well acquainted with the ones which are nothing more than gossip sites, which that is absolutely fine if you make it clear that's all it is. After all, sometimes people just want a space where they can chat shit and banter and come up with various theories and kick them around, not knowing whether it's actually true or not, and not saying that it's necessarily true. They just like the speculation and the sort of the detective work that goes with it. That's fine. But there are others that make these assertions as if they are facts, and they're not. And it plays precisely into the hands of this one's wife and Harry, because there are certain YouTubers that get close to uncovering certain nefarious activities of the Sussexes, or have actually done so. And naturally, a narcissist such as this one's wife doesn't want to be exposed in that way. Her nefarious activities she wants to keep out of the way because exposure represents a threat to control. And therefore, she will look to nullify that threat to control posed by those that genuinely uncover information and evidence of her nefarious conduct. It therefore makes it much easier for her to shut down those legitimate truth seekers, those bona fide exposers of her misconduct, by saying they're just like all these other idiots. And believe me, the arbiters, the decision makers, when they're presented with repeated and clear evidence that shows that things are being made up, that these are just quite obviously bullshit observations which are being presented as facts, they will, through intellectual laziness and expedience, lump the genuine exposers of the truth in with the bullshitters. Result, this one's wife and Harry get away with it, people lose their channels, people are demonetized, people are shut down, and this one's wife and Harry get to continue the game that they've been playing. This is why it's important to critically assess the information that's been provided, to go to the evidence and not to accept at face value what is being stated by certain supposed content, and I use that in its most elastic sense, creators. I talk about the behaviours vis-a-vis narcissism, and as I always explain to you, I leave it up to you to make your own mind up as to the base material. I explain where something is speculation, but is based upon understanding the way that a narcissist would behave. Other people present evidence. Other people present evidence and interpret it in a particular way, but at least they're utilising evidence. In other instances, it's quite clearly made up information that is being propagated as fact. And if people keep watching this, and if people keep presenting it as fact, and going on the internet talking about it as fact, it gains legs, and all it does is play precisely into the hands of this one's wife. I know I've said this before, and I undoubtedly will say it again, but as part of ensuring that the truth is outed in relation to Harry and this one's wife, and that people actually understand what they do, it is important to call out these instances where misinformation is being spouted about them. Not because I'm defending them, but because the evidence matters. I'm not one that regularly engages in the unearthing of information. Sometimes I do, but primarily my focus is on explaining the behaviour vis-a-vis her narcissism. But there are other content creators who are far more investigative in their work, and they will end up being shut down. They will end up being ridiculed and sidelined and marginalised if people allow the bullshit to continue. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.